I think it was a while ago where I made a video about discussing like 3 lenses that I thought were relatively important when it came to photography. It was the wide-angle lens, the 50mm, and the telephoto lens, and why those 3 combined was kind of a great pairing. Today, I'm going to be talking exclusively about the Sigma 100 to 400mm telephoto lens f5 to 6.3, which is this lens right here, and why it's currently my main telephoto lens. And I'm going to be discussing also why I think telephoto lenses are kind of important when it comes to landscape photography. Welcome everyone, welcome to the channel. My name is Frank, I'm a landscape photographer. If you're new, do consider subscribing and watch the rest of this video to find out if a telephoto lens might be the right fit for you. There is an abundance of telephoto lenses out there, from the cheapest of the cheap to the most expensive pieces of glass on the market. In my opinion, telephoto lenses are not a beginner's lens. It's not a tool for beginners. Without having already tried maybe a more practical lens, maybe like a 50mm, something that's a little bit more on the manageable side for a beginner before eventually swapping over to a telephoto lens. Telephoto lenses are of course essential for wildlife and sport photography, and with the more expensive ones being the lenses that have the furthest reach and the largest apertures. If you're introducing or thinking about introducing yourself to the telephoto lens market, then maybe start having a look at something like this right here. This is the Tamron 70 to 300mm f4 to 5.6. Hang on, let me check. It's kind of more of a beginner's version of a telephoto lens, to be completely honest with you. It's a plastic body, relatively inexpensive lens. Yeah, it hasn't got the greatest reach, but in my complete opinion, it's not too heavy. Like I said before, it is a plastic body. It's not the most professionally feeling piece of equipment when you put it in your hand. But it's a completely manageable lens, and I think this is a great introduction for beginners wanting to get into telephoto lenses. The drawback when purchasing a telephoto lens that's kind of more on the cheaper side, and this is actually kind of a big drawback in my opinion, is that the cheaper you go, the harder it is to find a lens that has optical stabilization included, or image stabilization basically. Most lenses have this feature, or should have this feature. It's essentially what allows you to get steady shots, and it's kind of make or break when it comes to sports and wildlife photography. However, my Tamron, this one here, this does not have optical stabilization integrated, so it was kind of a bummer not being able to get the sharpest of images, because you yourself have to stay incredibly still and have a really steady hand in order to get good shots when it's not hooked up to the camera and when the camera is not hooked up to a tripod, for example. Ultimately, my recommendation is to really save up for a good telephoto lens. I wouldn't suggest going down the cheap route when it comes to a telephoto lens just because it's cheap. I think that can really limit your creativity. Not necessarily limit your creativity, sorry. That is bad. I didn't mean to say that. It can limit what you can do creatively, I think, to some degree. Don't get me wrong, good gear does not make a good photographer. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is that further down the line, maybe investing in a telephoto lens that has optical stabilization, that has much higher specs, that has a larger aperture, saving up for a good telephoto lens further down the line might be more useful than you think. So yeah, that would be my recommendation, is to not rush into it, like maybe purchasing a different kind of lens that for sure you want. A telephoto lens, it's not a toy, something that you really need to consider, and consider what the lens can do. Consider what the lens can do, not just the price. This finally leads me to the second part of the video, and that is why a good telephoto lens is great for landscape photography. In a nutshell, and to not make this video too long, a good telephoto lens with a good reach can really help you in landscape photography isolate your subject, and that's kind of an advantage. When you need to photograph something in the distance, for example, and you know that a wide-angle lens just isn't going to cut something like that, then that's when a telephoto lens would come into play. Also, just a quick side note, investing in a telephoto lens, like the Sigma, for example, that is 100mm to begin with, can also be kind of an advantage, because when it comes to landscape photography, sometimes your subject is further away than you actually think it is. So reach is kind of crucial. The final reason why I think a good telephoto lens is important for landscape photography is because you have the luxury of being able to turn optical stabilization on or off. I'm going to give you a quick scenario of how something like that would come into play. Imagine for a second you have your camera on a tripod and you're photographing a landscape from a distance, and then suddenly a really interesting bird crosses your path in front of the camera and it perches itself on like a nearby rock. Okay, you then have the luxury of taking your camera straight off the tripod with the base plate still mounted onto the camera, with the telephoto lens attached, of course, switching optical stabilization on, photographing that bird, switching it back off, and putting it straight back onto the tripod itself. That's something that can only really happen in the moment, and of course, imagine if you didn't have optical stabilization, that could be detrimental to having blurry images of that bird, for example. And that's the spiel. I really hope you've enjoyed this video. Try to make it short and sweet, and once again, if you're new, consider subscribing, like, comment, do it now, thank you, and yeah, just thanks for sticking around, everyone, appreciate it. Till next time, guys, cheers.